can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So one of the things that I thought was really potent about the film was the sound design. It really created a sense of place. And I was curious if you could speak a little about the methodology behind that and the meticulousness with which you crafted that.
Yeah, I mean, first I'll say we were very lucky in that we got a really great group together in terms of the sound design and then the score and kind of how those two things melded together. I knew kind of from the very beginning that given the budget that this film would have and the horror genre in general, that sound was going to be huge in it. I mean, it came from a very sort of natural place of I've spent a lot of time just alone listening to the house or to whatever environment you're in. And it's crazy how sound just plays such a huge role in emotions you feel, especially fear. So the sound design was always a crucial piece. I wrote it into the script as much as I could in terms of like trying to evoke the mood. And then, while we were filming, it was definitely a thing of just keeping it always cognizant of kind of what we're hearing, like the clock that you hear, it's a real clock. And whatever's on set, just the atmospherics, just the sound of the space. And then in post-production, kind of, yeah, just really diving into it. For me, it was a matter of just kind of layering in terms of the part of building scares and just building tension is kind of tweaking those noises. I always found that as a kid, when I'd watch horror films, if I plugged my ears, it was like half as scary. So that just showed the value of the sound in terms of scares. So it was something that I was lucky enough that we had a lot of time to develop those sounds. And there's just a lot of stuff in there. You read about Foley effects and Foley sound effects and design, but it's fun when you're actually in the room with them. And you've got some creepy sound, and it turns out to be someone pulling a violin bow across an old washing machine. You're like, wow, that's where that came from. That's pretty gnarly. But yeah, no, it was I said to my producers very early on that sound design on this film is going to be like 60% of it. It's just crucial.
And a lot of that was baked into the script from the beginning. Even from my first read through, I was able to pull up Spotify and listen to some of the song choices that Keith had planned. And as a result, from the very beginning, was able to sort of sit in the sound of that world that Keith was creating.
Well, it was awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Our next question comes from Drew.
Hey, Keith and Dave, how are you guys doing?
Hey, man.
Good, how are you?
I wanted to first give out a quick little shout out to my friend T. Rabinowitz, who was in the first opening scenes. I remember when we first met, he was saying that he didn't get to see a lot of movies growing up, and is now watching all the classics that he missed. I don't know what your backgrounds were like, but how strict were your families, and were you also not allowed to watch some films that now have probably guided you as a filmmaker and as an actor?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of me, I suppose I was lucky in some ways in that I could watch whatever I wanted. For most of it, it was interesting kind of growing up. I think a lot of what my folks wanted me to see was educational, which is normal. So I watched a lot of PBS, a lot of nature shows, nature documentaries, that sort of stuff, which I actually quite liked and still like today. But when so that was the TV, but when it came to movies, when we'd like go to the video store and rent something, I kind of had free reign, my brother and I, and we would just go through the entire horror section, and then we'd go through the whole sci-fi section. And then as I got older, it became, the world, the art film section, or the world cinema section. And a lot of that stuff very early on kind of it just, you're right, it sank its claws into my brain in terms of creative process. So Alien was a touch point for me. I saw it maybe too young. I don't know. I was probably 10. And it was terrifying, but beautiful. It was just so beautiful, the look and the feel and the atmosphere of that film. And then in terms of the Vigil, it's interesting. A lot of the films that very much influenced my approach to it were films that I saw when I was young. One being Jacob's Ladder, that was aesthetically a film that just really spoke to me. There's also a European film called Possession from 1981 that just, it has this atmosphere that not even a knife can cut it. You need a chainsaw to cut the atmosphere in that film, and so a lot of that stuff kind of baked in.
Yeah, I think I watched the movie It when also I was too young, and I think I didn't go to the bathroom with the door closed for about a month after that. Kept expecting someone to crawl out of the sink. But I was fortunate that I was able to sort of explore different worlds through film when I was young, and through the people I met researching for this film, that was really a powerful entry point for me in understanding the differences in the way we were raised. I don't remember if it was Nati or who it was, but someone told me that their first way into American film was watching, I forget what it's called, but the Britney Spears movie on an iPod Nano in the park. And and he was like, that was an incredible cinematic piece. And I remember thinking, what? That's so different than the way that the entry point that I had, and just learning, how that was the beginning. But then, okay, now, Nati is a total film buff. So it was just a different way to experience the same culture. And, how does that inform us as people?
Yeah, it's funny that you guys mentioned It and Possession, even though there's other two films that are called It and The Possession that really have a lot of Jewish folklore influence. And there's so much influence in horror, like even American Werewolf in London. Are there other Jewish folk horror tales you'd like to tell, Keith, or are you planning to continue exploring folklore in films like Firestarter or other projects?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a lot of ideas of other Jewish horror. It's definitely a kind of a well that has not been tapped, really. We've seen Dybbuk's in films. Typically, the setup for a Dybbuk is a family that's usually not Jewish finds a Dybbuk box and unleashes a Dybbuk. I think there are interesting ways into a Dybbuk story that we haven't seen, particularly around exorcisms, which do exist in certain communities in the Jewish faith. Golems haven't gotten their fair swing, but also interesting. I've got a film idea for Lilith, which is typically the kind of succubus thing that people picture, but in the Jewish faith, there are many Liliths. It's actually plural Lilithim, and they're not always succubuses. They have very different sort of approaches to what they are. So I think that it's a fertile ground. It's something, the producers of the Vigil and I have talked about a lot in terms of what else do we tell? Where do we go? So yeah, no, it's exciting. It feels like the Vigil kind of opened a door to some of that stuff.
Anything Lilith, I'm on board for. Thanks, guys.
Sure, thanks.
Our next question comes from Tracy.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me all right?
Sure.
Sure can.
All right, excellent. So my question is going to be about the demon and the torture that Dave had to go through during the film.
Mm-hmm.
So the Dybbuk chose to torture Dave in a myriad of ways, but specifically when escaping the house, it chose to torture him physically by breaking his bones. What was the thought process that made you think like bone breaking as opposed to any other body horror was like the way to go?
Yeah, I can talk to the first part of it in terms of the kind of where that idea came from and how that worked. It's a very kind of standard thing in horror films that the first question anyone asks is, why don't you leave the house? Like, why don't you just get out of the house? And so it's part of this was dealing with that. What if you could get out of the house, but you had to go back? Like, if you had to go back, that's even worse than getting away and being followed necessarily. So it was kind of, that was the idea coming from that place. And then the second thing was again, it was trying to ground it in some sort of authenticity and reality. Like, what could a demon actually do to a person other than make them see things and have a psychological impact? I thought it'd be interesting to have it affect under the skin. If you could somehow get into the tendons and the muscle and the bone, like, you could do a lot there, and that could be interesting. And again, it's also audio based in terms of kind of understanding the depth of it. But Dave can talk to, I mean, Dave and I spent a lot of time talking about this scene in particular and how that performance would play out.
You know, just even hearing Keith talk about that stuff is to me. It's, you know, physical suffering, anyone who's experienced it knows just hearing the word broken bone is enough to elicit fear and pain in someone. But I think we also all know that there is no suffering worse than the suffering that is self-imposed from internal struggles. And the fact that the journey Yakov goes on results in physical pain, but the thing giving that pain to him is his internal struggle, just creates this cycle of torture that is, I mean, truly horrifying. And, you know, I sent Keith a very regrettable video at one point where I was trying to figure out how this scene where Yakov has to retrieve something from his esophagus. You know, what is it that creates this sort of pain and disturbance so deep in your digestive tract that it actually manifests something to the point where it gets wrapped around your uvula and you have to actually manually use your hand to reach in and yank it out of your system. So I'm walking around this apartment I'm staying in, trying to understand this, and it results in this like coughing fit. Of course, being an actor, I think, well, I got to film this so I can remember it. And I film a video of me that essentially ends with me like over the toilet gagging, like something you would never want to share with anyone. And then when I felt it was sufficiently done, I was like, all right, I'm gonna text that to Keith. You know, so we were sort of living in this self-imposed torment to try to really plumb the depths of what someone can go through as they are experiencing mental, physical trauma and being trapped within their own worst nightmare.
That sounds like an ordeal, if nothing else. I'm sure we all appreciate that after watching the movie. My next question is going to go to Dave. Have you had any prior experiences with Divics or any Jewish demon?
Ooh, any Jewish demon, you say? No, you know, I don't know that prior to this I had any experience with Jewish demons because I, like many, weren't really aware of their existence. I had heard of Divics, I had heard of golems, but as far as I understood, the Jewish faith didn't believe in hell. It didn't believe in that sort of eternal damnation. But when I started to meet people from the community, I realized that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of people out there that are told, if you do this, you will be punished. If you go this place, they will get you. And that was eye-opening to me. So it really opened up a whole new world of fears that I had previously not been exposed to. Whereas, you know, I might have dealt with my share of demons in my own way. The Jewish demon was a new experience for me and something I was very excited to explore as we were, you know, undertaking this horrific journey.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Our next question comes from David. You're on mute.
Can't hear you, David.
Sorry.
Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right. My question, you kind of touched on a lot of this before, but I was just curious, you know, this film feels so authentic and so kind of steeped in Jewish tradition. You know, how did you, Keith, go about kind of preparing to make this world feel real? You know, I don't know if you had like a consultant or whatnot. And Dave, it sounds like you were thinking about a lot of the horror aspects, but how did you kind of culturally assimilate into this, you know, place that I don't think a lot of us really have much of a window into?
Yeah, in terms of the authenticity of the location and I mean, in terms of the house that we were in and the clothes and the kind of look and the feel, some of it, in terms of the prayers and the ritual and kind of the mythology, that was stuff that I had researched in the script. But then when we got to set, when we found that house and when we were in the community, was really when we got really to work in terms of the production design, with Liz Tunkel, our production designer, in terms of really capturing authenticity. We had a lot of advisors. We had folks that are in the film, that are performers who are in the film, who came from that community, who helped us to create as authentic a space inside that house as possible. It's interesting that it was important to me that the space itself feel as though as real as it could, both for performance sake, but also just atmosphere and just, and, and we really dove in head first. There are, if you open any of the drawers of that furniture in that house, you'd find stuff in them. We never do, but if you did, it'd all be authentic. They would be the right spatula. The mezuzahs, the little boxes on the walls, those are from a particular store in Borough Park that are placed exactly where they need to be. The paintings that are on the walls, in fact, a lot of them were done by the actor who plays Sarah in the film, who is also one of our consultants who comes from that community. So yeah, it was super important that this place be as authentic as possible, both in terms of being a real representation of a Hasidic household, but also for the performances, for being in the world. And it goes beyond just the actor who's in front of the camera, but everyone on set needs to feel it. It needs to feel as though they're in this space. Just because that atmosphere, if you create that bubble, in a sense, I feel like it lends itself to every aspect of the production.
Yeah. A lot of people say, oh, isn't it fun to make a horror movie? Like, not this one. And I mean that in the best way possible. But yeah, in addition to all of the care, which was deep, that was taken to the set and to the, the building of that world, it was very important to me that Yakov was never an imitation. I never wanted to feel like I was just parroting something that I had heard. I never, as much as I was learning a lot of my lines phonetically, it was also very important for me to understand what every single intonation was and what every single piece of each sentence was, so that I could properly say what Yakov was trying to express. And in that way, the accent and the dialect that I developed with Malky and Keith for Yakov was, at first, I think I remember talking to Keith about, early on, the accent isn't going to be there because I don't want to push it. I don't want to try to just create this thing that sounds like what I think this is supposed to sound like. I want to live in this world and meet these people and delve deep enough so that organically, once I understand Yakov's childhood, once I understand what's the first American movie Yakov ever saw, how does he speak to one person versus another? How does it change the way that he attempts to express himself? Does Yakov care if he sounds more American in speaking to one person versus another? So that sort of was able to develop organically over time until we eventually started filming. I felt that Yakov had kind of like come to form. And in that way, I felt confident performing this character's voice without feeling like I was just doing an imitation. That it was a person with respect to the community.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the care you all took in this film. It really shines through. Really quick follow up. The main kind of part of this movie is sitting with a dead body overnight. So I guess for each of you, what's the longest time you've spent with a dead body? Is that time 0? Is that time greater than a minute? What would that be?
Yeah, I mean, for myself, it's definitely greater than a minute. It's hours. Just both from my previous career when I was in healthcare, to just my own personal life and family members that I've been with if they've passed. In some ways I've been lucky enough to be with them when they passed, and spend time in that sort of moment. It's interesting, the kind of shomer it's a beautiful sort of ritual in that it shows a lot of respect to this member of the community that died. And it's, it's relatively common in the Jewish community that there is this ritual and that people do this. But, for myself, I had never been a shomer, but I've certainly spent a lot of time around dead bodies.
Yeah, well, the experience that comes to mind is the death of a friend of mine when I was younger. It was my first year of college, and seeing him, it was an open casket, and I remember in that moment not really being sure how to behave. What is this tradition? What are we supposed to do here? And I just felt the need to reach out and put my hand on his chest. And I remember thinking, am I doing something wrong? Is this taboo? But I needed to do it. And in that moment, it was almost like he gave me permission. It was like, what does taboo mean? I'm here, you're there. And I remember feeling like we traded places just for a second. And that was a very important experience to me, as a friend and just as a person. Imparted a feeling of gratitude and a sense of grief, that I was able to then work through for the rest of my life. So that was probably my closest experience.
I think that those experiences shine through in this film. It lends, additional authenticity. So thank you so much for this film and, for your work on it.
Thank you.
Our last question comes from James.
Hi guys. Most movies are about the interaction between two characters or more, but for a lot of this movie, it's Yakov by himself. So I'm curious how you each approached his solo scenes to make sure you're setting the right tone and keeping a consistent character when, like Keith mentioned, so much of the movie is done in post-production with sound design and everything. Just talk a little bit about that. Thanks.
I can talk a little bit about kind of the setup and the idea behind it. When I first met with my producers, they kind of were asking like, well, where's this film set? Like, where are the locations? And for me, it was Brooklyn, the city, it was that house. And the third was Dave's face. Like that was the location that this film was going to live on. And so I knew what I wanted it to look like in terms of the lighting, in terms of the angle, in terms of where we're at. And I knew what I wanted to feel and what the performance, what it was going to convey, what the message we needed to get out. But it was really on Dave to bring that and to get. It's difficult because when you're, the challenge is it's a guy alone with a body who is going through his own mental sort of, a lot of these issues that he's grappling with. And yet when you're filming it, it is Dave in a chair with 50 people surrounding him, on the set, everyone kind of, watching, waiting. And of course, we're making it out of order in terms of the chronology of filming versus the chronology of the film itself. So one thing that was important to me was just touching base all the time in terms of where we are emotionally, how we're getting from one scene to the next in terms of when you cut this together, how do you keep it feeling tonally similar? But Dave can talk about kind of the actual experience of, that of emoting that.
Well, yeah, the work is the work. You bring your preparation, you bring your study and your research, you lay out the timeline of your character, the through lines. You understand, okay, in this scene I have this knowledge, in this scene I do not yet have this knowledge. So when it came down to it, Keith and I were able to look at each other and say, okay, now in this scene, this is where we're coming from, this is what we're focused on. And I could consult my notes. And as I told you before, I had been trying to live within this sort of self-imposed psychological torture. So that work was all done. I tried to come to set prepared. And then when it came time to actually sit down and hear Keith say action, then it's just a matter of listening, whether it's listening to my own thoughts or the clock or another actor. It's just a matter of trying to go through what Yakov is going through. And the way that I look at that is just sort of almost like a domino effect. One thing always leads to another. We all say one word because of the word that came before it. And, that was all there in the script, and that was all there in the production and the work that was done. So when it came time to actually do it, it was just a matter of having trust, maybe dare say a little faith, and just showing up and doing the work. And that's really the fun part.
All right, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.